The U.S. Treasury Secretary warns the country should expect a decline in the dollar's share of global reserves in the coming years. Janet Yellen made the remarks in response to a question at a Congress committee meeting. She said the use of U.S. sanctions has motivated certain countries to look for currency alternatives. Yellen, however, said that there is no alternative that could completely displace the greenback, as the U.S. currency plays a role that no other country is able to replicate. Experts say the dollar's status as a reserve currency has seen gradual erosion for the past 2 decades, and it saw a steep decline in 2022. Over the past months, several countries have announced shifting away from the dollar in trade. That includes Iran, Russia, China, and some South American countries, among others. Who better to talk to than Paul Craig Roberts, chairman of the Institute for Political Economy, who joins us. Paul Craig Roberts, welcome. So the statements by Janet Yellen on the dollar, does it surprise you?
It's worse than she admits, but no, I'm not surprised. The use of the dollar as world reserve currency has been cut in half. And the consequence is it makes it very difficult for the United States to finance its trade deficit and its budget deficit. As long as the dollar is the world reserve currency widely used, central banks keep their reserves in U.S. Treasury bonds. So it was never a problem for the United States to finance its trade and budget deficits. But as the dollar's road shrinks, the supply of financing for the American budget and trade deficits dries up. It becomes smaller. And so the United States faces the possibility of a very severe currency crisis. If it can't finance its deficits, it will see a sharp drop in the exchange value of the dollar. And because the United States offshored its manufacturing industry, it's import dependent. And so if the currency falls, the prices of everything rise sharply, and it will result in a tremendous reduction in the living standards of the United States population. So that's the real problem that the United States faces.
Okay, are we looking at a gradual process here? Because we're seeing somewhat of an increased appetite for this in the past year or so compared to the previous years for countries to shift away, or I don't want to say shift away, but de-dollarize perhaps their economies a little bit more, like the central bank reserves from countries. But are we looking at this to gain momentum now? Because it's somewhat in a higher pace than before.
Yes, it looks like it's gradual, but that's just because once Washington weaponized the dollar with the sanctions against Russia and Iran and other countries, and once the United States stole the reserves of the Russian central bank, this caused the process to speed up dramatically, but it takes time to create new clearance mechanisms to the SWIFT system, and it takes time to work out how the countries that have been using the dollars to settle their international balances, how they adopt the new currencies. Which way will they go? Is everybody's currency to be used? Or are they going to try to create some other reserve currency? But that's all being solved. And once that's solved, I think it will proceed very rapidly. There'll be a very rapid departure from the dollar. As I understand it today, only 30 countries support.
Taking a look at the meeting of the BRICS grouping of countries that's supposed to happen in August, one of the things that they are going to announce is a new currency. Now you have that on the one hand, and you have many countries that actually have applied for membership. But then the infrastructure, it's somewhat puzzling as to whether that's in place or not, because you have that announcement of the new currency. You have countries that have said they are doing trade in their own national currencies, but then you have something that needs to maybe channel all these into one, because you have SWIFT on the one hand, but yet you don't have that for these countries who want to shift away from the dollar. It's somewhat confusing.
Well, it's not exactly confusing. It just takes time to create an alternative system. And I think a large number of countries, including large ones like China and Russia, have concluded that they simply cannot trust Washington and will not use the dollar because the dollar is weaponized and Washington uses it to control their sovereignty. And so it's abandoned. And so I think they have constructed the process will proceed swiftly. I don't think it's necessary to have an alternative reserve currency. You don't really need a reserve currency. All countries will simply pay their payments in their own currency. And the countries that don't maintain a sound currency will suffer. But the reason we have a reserve currency was the United States took that role from Great Britain at the close of World War II and has been the basis of American power. If you are the reserve currency country, it means that the central banks of all the governments in the world keep their reserves in your debt instruments. So you have unlimited financing for trade and budget deficits. That's the basis of American power. If the dollar loses that role, as it is, then the United States is losing its power.
All right, thank you very much for that. Paul Craig Roberts, Chairman of the Institute for Political Economy.